During the heyday of arcade cabinets, difficulty and monetization of video games were physically intertwined. You would put a quarter in the coin slot and boom, you can play the game until you run out of lives, which was often pretty quick. For developers, the trick was to create a game that when you watched it, you would go, oh, that's so easy. The original Pac-Man is literally just one repeating level. How hard could that possibly be? Very hard is the answer. This was truly the first survival horror game. The ghosts are just total dickheads. Just when you think you know that the ghost thinks that you're going this way, turns out he knew you were thinking that and he went this way instead. If by some miracle you reach stage 19, you will discover that the power pellets no longer do anything. It's like at this point of the game, the ghosts just say to you, nope, you had your fun and now the game is over. Goodbye. Arcades were brimming with looping endless games that demanded one knee-jerk reaction after another. I mean, look at this. Can you describe to me what is happening here? How do you play that? These were games designed to kill you fast and suck down quarters, and people loved them. Then, in the mid-80s, we see the focus shifting back towards consoles. With the NES, games start to take on the structure of having a set amount of stages, and with this change, the role of difficulty is transformed. Now the challenge becomes, how do we stretch out a 30-minute game into something that will take months to complete? The solution? Just put a bunch of stupid fucking bullshit everywhere. Cheap-ass one-hit kills, oblique puzzles, broken enemy spawns, impossible jumps, enemies that constantly knock you off a ledge. Go dig up an NES and tell me how many of those games you can actually complete. None of them. Don't lie, you probably can't even beat Bubble Bobble, look at you. Even the titles that were directed specifically at younger children make Dark Souls look like fucking DuckTales, except that DuckTales is probably harder. Going forward, however, games would continue to become more and more approachable as developers found out that people actually like to win. Red Dead 2 is a great modern example of this. The game aims your gun for you, it steers your horse for you, it practically plays itself, and despite all of this, it is the most critically acclaimed game this year. Is it so wrong that people want to play a game without getting their dick knocked off every 2 seconds? No, I don't think so. Not every game needs to be some death march, but when you try to have it both ways, you run into problems. Selectable difficulties are commonly achieved by simply giving enemies more health and damage, but in the back of my mind I'm always wondering how much should they have. Halo 3 is the first game in the series that tells you heroic is how the game is meant to be experienced. It just straight up says, hey, this is the real one, those other ones are fake. If only they told me this back in Halo 2. COD 4 tells you that on regular, your abilities in combat will be tested, which if a dog picked up a controller with his mouth, that might be right. Veteran though, is actually pretty accurate. Okay, we got 2 grenades in there. That's fine. Okay, now there's another one. All right, now, oh, there's and my own guy just picked up a grenade and threw it next to me. Okay, now there's another grenade. We just gotta chuck that. Okay, and now we just gotta wait for the flashbang to wear off. What killed me? When the difficulty is this blatantly artificial, it trivializes your achievements. Some games do put in more effort though. For Silent Hill 2, the easier difficulties cause the puzzles to make 4% more sense. This year's Mega Man 11 is full of NES era horse shit. You have this part, and then there's this part, and then we got this classic part. These severe jumps in difficulty are just the result of poor design. Ideally, a game should get progressively harder as you play, but the reality is most of them are like Then you got Kirby. Then you got Donkey Kong Country, which is like, alright, we're gonna hit you with some difficulty bumps, minecart level, hard-ass barrel part, and then you get the K. Rool. This is where the game goes from tough but fair to tough but fuck you. If you're gonna lock me in a hellfuck with a fucking Hitler bitch, then at least give me some decent checkpoints, man. Come on. Undoubtedly, the cruelest part of older games is how when you lose, they will just kick you all the way back to the start. Even some of the hardest NES titles like Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden would have the courtesy of only knocking you back to the start of the stage when you got hit off a ledge by a guy who spawned in midair that you already killed. Without checkpoints, you force players to repeat large chunks of a video game, which is not only irritating, but fatal to the overall pacing. On the other hand, saturate your game with checkpoints and you lose that anxious feeling which makes challenging games so tense. The iconic bonfires of Dark Souls are not only a much needed reprieve, but a glowing beacon of your progress in a game whose atmosphere is dishearteningly oppressive. Meanwhile, Resident Evil 1, which is a game where doors take 17 minutes to open, requires you to use an ink ribbon item every time you want to save. Fighting games are in a tricky spot where if you play against the computer, and this is on the hardest difficulty, keep in mind, they are just incapable of winning. Then you hop online and you fight this guy. Team games like Overwatch and Call of Duty lower the bar for entry considerably by allowing 5 other people to pick up your slack, and if you lose, you can just blame your team. When you lose in a fighting game though, it's like, dude, game sucks, not my fault. Many players, when they're met with a seemingly insurmountable challenge, they just say, fuck this. For me, that game was Bloodborne. When I played this in 2015, I couldn't even get past the first boss. It wasn't until last year that I actually figured out how simple these games are. Not to suggest it's easy, just simple. It's just dodge and hit. And once you understand that it's dodge and hit, then you realize that the game ain't shit. Pac. I think it's always better to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Take Ikaruga. This game is just ridiculous. What you're staring at here is of course hard difficulty. Now let's turn it down to easy. Alright, yeah. Now this makes it much easier. It doesn't pull punches, yet if you go into the settings, it allows you to have infinite lives. Now you may ask, how can a game be challenging when you can't even technically lose? Like this. I died so many times on that first run through that at one point I thought I might run out of infinite lives. It was merely the first step, and on subsequent playthroughs I would go, oh wow, only 68 deaths this time. Oh wow, 50, 20, 13. Each time I returned to the game, I understood it a little bit better. Just like the 80s coin ops that inspired it, the idea of accomplishment doesn't stem from beating the game, but rather mastering it. The thing about difficult games is that they tend to grow on you, but is it the challenge that makes them so exciting, or rather the artistry hiding beneath?